All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our photography program with Frank Stopa. I'm Lorraine Moffa, Programming Coordinator for Loudoun County Public Library, and your host this evening. Please feel free to use the chat box to send any comments or questions you might have for Frank, and I'll be happy to relay them to him either during the program or afterwards. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Frank Stopa. He is a Washington, D.C. area fine art minimalist photographer with a strong interest in black and white landscapes and seascapes. An avid technical scuba diver, he also combines diving and photography to capture images with maritime history and underwater themes. Hello, Frank.
Hi, Lorraine. How are you? Welcome, everybody.
Good. Good. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you for having me. All right, so off I go. We're going to talk about natural light photography tonight. And I thought I would start off with just this very quick quote from Alfred Stieglitz, for anybody who doesn't know who he is. Lived from 1864 until 1946, was an American photographer. He was also a promoter of modern art and is said to be probably the one man, if there is one person, responsible for turning photography into fine art through his promotions. He worked through a gallery that he owned and operated in New York City for over 50 years and is well known in the photography world as the person that we all look up to in terms of promoting our art. He was also married to the famous painter Georgia O'Keeffe. In any event, his quote, "Wherever there is light, one can photograph," is kind of what I'm going to talk about here today. The idea, wherever there is natural light, we can take photos. I'm going to talk about a few different things here during the presentation. As Lorraine said, please feel free to ask questions, some of which she'll jump in and interrupt me on. Others we'll save till the end, but we'll try to get to all of them. I'm going to also tell you that I have probably, I think the number is 50 some odd slides, which is a lot for an hour. Most of them are my photographs that I'm just going to talk about in terms of how I captured them. Some I have more details than others, so you'll please forgive me if I don't have all of the aperture, ISO, and shutter speed settings for every single one of them. I have them for most of them, though. In any event, so I'll try to talk about natural light photography through the natural light photographs that I've taken over the last 5 years or so. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is light in photography, and talk about Sir John Herschel, a British scientist who coined the term photography in 1839. Photography for him was a combination of two Greek roots, phos, meaning light, and graphe, meaning drawing, basically creating the word photograph, meaning drawing with light. And that's essentially what we're doing. The idea here is we're looking for light and interesting ways that it plays upon our subjects, objects, people, anything that we photograph, and working with that light to come up with the most dramatic images we can. There are basically three different kinds of lights, or two different kinds of lights that I'm going to start with, two of which we're not going to talk about. Artificial light, we're not going to talk about. Artificial light is the use of continuous lights, LED lights, flashes, strobes, speed lights. Well, that's not natural light, so we're not going to talk about that. But that is, just keep in mind, one kind of light that can be used to illuminate your subject while you're photographing him or her. In fact, there's a light right in front of me right now that's illuminating me. It's a continuous LED light, just to give a little bit more light so that you can see me on this program. That's artificial light. Ambient light, there are two different kinds of ambient light, artificial and or natural, that can be used to illuminate a subject. The artificial is the same as what we just talked about. Anything electric or battery power that you plug in that lights a subject. Natural being anything that promotes the use of essentially sunlight or moonlight to to illuminate your subject. We use the term ambient light as well, and artificial can be an ambient light. If you've got a room light on that's on the, the ceiling of a room and it lights up the room and you take the photograph with that light on, I think most photographers would tell you, and it's not specifically a photography light. I think most photographers will tell you that that's an ambient light, an artificial light, but ambient as well, not a natural light. But those are out there. Natural light we're going to talk about tonight, the sun and the moon, using the sun, using the moon, using natural lighting from the environment to light our subjects and do it in creative ways. Okay, so natural light photography. Here are the three topics I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the fact that great images happen. Now, ... What does that mean? We're gonna talk about how you make them happen, or how you get in the way of them so that you can make them happen. Then we're going to talk about direct light and the techniques and gear that you can use to enhance the use of direct sunlight, direct moonlight to take photos. And then we're going to talk about indirect light and the gear and techniques used to take advantage of that as well. Before I get started into great images happen, I will just give you a very quick look at that image to the right here on my screen. This is one of my underwater images. It's the very simple bow of a boat in a quarry. I'm about 23 feet under the surface of the water, and literally I'm just relying on the sunlight coming in through the surface, being diffused by the surface, and creating this image. You note, because of the sunlight traveling through the water, it is being diffused and spread out quite a bit, and does not, as a result, generally speaking, form very harsh shadows, very harsh black and white contrast, or dark and light contrast. And this image has a soft feel to the light for that reason. Basically, the light has been diffused. And that's one thing we'll talk about a little bit later. Okay, so great images happen with planning, and that's what we'll talk about. Okay, this image here is an image I've used, I think, in one of my previous classes, talking about Photoshop, because this is, I think, the stitching of 5 or 6 images into a 3:1 ratio panorama of the Olympic mountain range out in Washington State. This was shot in the late afternoon, 4:30-ish in the afternoon, time-wise, on the Pacific Coast. And I took advantage of, I was there, I had planned to take this photo, wanted to wait. I wasn't able to get there at sunrise, which wouldn't have been great because it would have been behind me shooting the mountain range, and I really wanted to make sure that I got that range illuminated. I wanted diffused light, and what I managed to get there, based on my planning and circumstances, was that there was a fair bit of haze in the air, in the atmosphere. So the sun, which is right dead center of the photo and above it, has been spread and diffused and softened, I guess, is a good way to describe it, to a good degree. And I got this nice, softening of the mountain range as you move back beyond the very first island in Puget Sound. Okay, great images. Great images happen with, you see great light like the one I just showed you. You see the image that you want, you compose it, and as I like to say, you just click. In other words, you show up, you look, you say, wow, that looks great, let me take the picture. There's usually more to it than that, and that's why I say great images are also planned. And when I say planned, that means knowing what the weather's going to be like, knowing the time, finding and adapting to the light. Then you just click, then you take the picture. So there's a little bit of planning here. Now, I'm talking about landscape. I take seascapes and a few underwaters in this presentation, most of which are outdoors, considered outdoor photography. Is there indoor photography that is natural light? Yes, there is. I don't know if I've chosen that many images here for this presentation because I'm primarily a landscape and seascape guy. But you can also rely on light coming in through windows to take pictures as well. All of that requires you to understand when that light is going to be coming through that window, when it's going to be lighting the room, and how. So a little bit of that same research applies to indoor natural light photography as well. Here's an indoor shot for you anyway. This is a shot that I took of the Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, back in, I think it was 2017. This was my first visit, and this was one of the best shots that I got out of this visit. The interesting thing, I like this photo. Aside from the fact that I'm not really crazy about the vanishing point kind of look of it, it's almost a little too symmetrical. I wanted something a little bit more angled, a little bit more with a little bit more tension in it. Didn't capture it that day. That day was also one. I don't know if anybody remembers a presentation I did where I actually forgot. I had all of my camera gear and forgot my SD cards. So as a result, that photo was shot with an iPhone. Got a lot of good ones that day. The indoor environment was really good. These are all natural lit photographs indoors. So anyway, I wanted to go back and shoot another shot. And so about 2 years later, I went back to the penitentiary and got a fantastic day. Didn't really do much in terms of research, other than I knew the place, I knew where I wanted to go to take the photo, and that's the photo I took. What I really like about this is you can see all the way back in the background, the light is really diffused, and it looks like the corridor just kind of dissipates to some degree. That is because that's fog. I got there and it turned out there was fog in the building. It was a rainy day. I think it was in the month of July, so it was warm outside. The building on the inside was actually really cold, and so the difference between the cold, the warmth outside, moisture in the air created fog inside the building. And so I got this shot. So a little bit different, but that's one where my research really was, I knew the location. I knew I wanted to shoot something different than just that one straight down the corridor, and came back and shot this one as an alternative. What do I research? Okay, so I'm going to talk about that for a little bit here. I research location, obviously. So to talk about the Eastern State Penitentiary location, where am I shooting? What is there to shoot there? In this particular case, there are all kinds of shots to be had inside the penitentiary. And this was one that I liked a lot, wanted to go back and shoot it again. So I researched that in the sense that I knew the location, knew that I wanted to go back, had already made notes a year before, get back there. I research weather. So when we're talking about natural light photography, it's really important for you to know what the weather conditions are. Am I looking at, if you're looking at a bright sunny day, then you're going to get good bright sunlight, but you're also going to get harsh sunlight in the middle of the day, which means, in some ways, you're going to get really sharp distinction between the dark and the light. You're going to get really good shadows, but you also may not get an awful lot of detail in those shadows. So you have to know that. So weather's important. If you know that it's going to be rainy or cloudy, then you know that the natural light's going to be diffused to a great degree. In fact, the cloudier it is, the less light you might actually have. You might actually have to bump up your ISO in order to get enough light to get a decent image. So you want to know what those weather conditions are going to be. I love researching weather conditions because I'll tell you what, I like to shoot long exposures. I like cloudy skies, with long exposures, you're going to have the clouds that are going to be drawn out and stretched out by the long exposure times that you use. Also, when you do that, I want less light. Harsh light really tends to overexpose long exposures, and cloudy circumstances gives you a little bit nicer light, in my opinion. So researching that, knowing it's going to be a cloudy day, can work in my favor if I want to shoot long exposure. If I want something that has really good contrast, I want to know that I'm going out on a bright sunny day where the light is going to be a little harsher, but also a little more defined compared to the shadows. I'm going to also research sunrise and sunset times, and we're going to talk later about the golden hour and the blue hour as perfect times to get out with your cameras and shooting. Well, to know the blue hour and the golden hours, you have to know when the sun's rising and you have to know when the sun is setting. That's all critically important, because what that really means is you have to know how long it's going to take you to get to your photo site, which means you have to know how early to get up in the morning. And I have literally gotten up at 2 in the morning to drive 4 or 5 hours to get to a site to be able to do a sunrise photography, along the Atlantic coast. Because I've got 4 or 5 hour drive. I have to get there before the light comes up. We'll talk about why that's the case when we get to blue and golden hour. But you got to research those times. Those conditions, along with the weather conditions, along with high tide and low tide, which I'll get to in a second, are really easy to research, because all you got to do is Google them. Google high tide, low tide times, and the location that you're looking at, and generally speaking, you can come up with a chart somewhere or multiple charts that'll give you those times, sunset, sunrise times. And obviously, I just advocate weather.com, because it's the one I use all the time as a website, as an app, to research weather, to know whether you're going to get a bright sunny day, cloudy day, or something in between. Okay, more to the research side. This is not a recommendation, just to give you a sense for the kind of information you can get that is very useful for knowing when and where the sun's going to be. I have an app on my phone called Sunseeker. I really like it. I'm sure there are probably others that do the same thing. But just to give you a sense for the kinds of information you can get, this on the right side of the screen is a screenshot I took this morning of the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C., right there in the crosshairs in the center of the image. And what you see around it, all around it in a circular pattern, is the arrows that point to the Washington Monument. Well, I've set the target on the monument, so the arrows are going to be pointing to the monument, but each arrow is in a different place. Each arrow shows you the direction the sun's going to be shining at the monument at a particular time of day. So if you start off all the way on the top right corner of the image, it says rises. So that's sunrise time. Now, it doesn't have a time on there. The app has other pages which gives you that, but it's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 6:10, 6:15 in the morning at this point in time, Eastern Standard Time. So that's where the sun's going to rise up on the right side, the upper right side of that image as you look down on it. And then you can predict where the shadows are going to be directly behind the monument. So you can get a sense for what kind of shadows and contrast you're going to get from the sun. And then, of course, it goes around all the way around. When you start looking at, you go to 12 p.m. in the lower right corner and look at the direction the light points, that's probably when that Google Earth photo was taken. Why? Because you can see the direction that the shadow travels from the Washington Monument to the upper left of the image. But anyway, that just gives you a sense. If you're really interested in doing natural light photography, outdoors, landscape type images, having an app like this simplifies your research dramatically. And I use this every single day. I'm always looking at this app, always searching on places, finding Google, and they use Google Earth images to look over a location and get a sense for how the sun is going to play against objects in that location. So useful stuff. Look for those kinds of apps if you really want to get into this. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about some images here. Actually, I think 1 or 2 images, and then we're going to get right into looking at what direct sunlight in natural light photography. This is another example of an image that I researched. These are the Great Falls of the Passaic River in Paterson, New Jersey. It looks quite amazing when you're there looking right through this canyon. I call this image Canyon Falls, because you're looking through a canyon at these falls. The river is up above you, and then it drops down to the level you're at. You're at the river level as you're looking into the image, but the river is actually in the upper left corner, is above you, and then drops down. This is a dramatic place, great for photography. But this is one where I'd heard about this place through family that live in New Jersey. Researched it myself online, looked at Google Earth, looked at websites, looked at the U.S. National Park Service as a website because this is a part of a national park, in order to learn as much as I could about the site. So that was, the research phase of this. Google Earth, though, doesn't necessarily tell you everything you need to know or give you a real ground feel. So walking the ground becomes important. Well, in April of 2019, I got the chance to go up there and walk the ground with my wife. So I had my cameras in hand, and we walked all around the bottom here. We went up to the top, walked around. Finally, I came down and said, "This is where I want to shoot," and shot a series of long exposures. Uh, Obviously, black and white was the final edit version, but that's what I did. What I maximized here was this was a mid-morning time to shoot. I think if I remember correctly, looking from the right side of the image is the east. So morning, sun's coming up. Mid-morning, the sun's coming up just enough to peek into that canyon to light the water and create that nice contrast between the rock walls and the water itself. So that's the way that was all planned, and then just literally found multiple places to shoot from after I took my initial shot. Ended up collecting probably 20 or 30 shots that I really like of the falls, this one being my favorite. But that was all a result of research and walking the ground. Okay, now we're going to talk about direct light. Direct light is hard, it's harsh, creates lens flares, creates overexposures. It's great for silhouettes, but it's not easy to deal with. And there are a couple of things you need to do. We'll talk about that as we go, as I also talk about some of the images I've shot. This image was shot literally out of my hotel room window in Los Angeles, California, overlooking Los Angeles International Airport. This was approximately 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, looking out of my hotel room due west. And yeah, lo and behold, I shot straight into the sun. Everybody tells you don't shoot straight into the sun. Well, you know what? Sometimes you shoot straight into the sun. And this is one of my favorite images of all time. I think I captured this one in 2016 or 15, 16 probably. But this is direct into the sun. The key here was I did have, I believe, a circular polarizer on my lens, which softened up the light a bit. The other thing also that I was able to at least take advantage of, I don't want to claim that I knew this was going to be the case, because this was one that just, when I looked out the window, it was, there's an image. You can see behind the first sort of a ridge with a lot of the houses and trees in the very foreground there at the bottom. But there's a distinct haze behind that layer in the base of the mountain range. Anybody who's ever spent any time in California, especially Los Angeles, knows there's all kinds of haze and smog and marine layer and fog and whatever you want to call it in California. This happened to be a day, an evening, where there was a good bit of that. And I was lucky enough to have this image right before me. So grabbed all the camera gear, got it out, and started shooting photos. So there was not much planning there, good fortune, and good luck with a hotel room window that was just right. But in this particular case, I was able to see that and shoot the photo because of all of those factors, especially the diffusion of the sunlight. Okay. So let's keep moving. This was shot about a month and a half ago, almost 2 months ago at this point, in St. Louis at Gateway Arch National Park. And this was an interesting silhouette. I call this a silhouette. I guess it really is a silhouette, which is natural light. Shot this with the sun behind the monument. Before going out to St. Louis, I was actually driving through St. Louis on the way to Tulsa back at the end of May, early June. Had planned to stop here for a couple hours in the morning. I knew that I was going to get there in terms of driving somewhere not long after sunset. I knew the sun would be up in the sky. didn't know whether it would be that high or not when I got there. But one of the things I was told by a friend who lives in St. Louis and advised me on this said, whatever you do, uh, go in and around the arch and play with the arch with the sun if you want to get the best shots. And so this particular one, I've got the entrance to the underground carriages, I guess carriages that take you up to the top and all the way around the arch. And I wanted to use this entryway, which is really kind of cool and minimalistic, in the foreground. But the sun was really beating down from the east. And so what I did was literally created shade for myself by standing in such a way that the sun was right behind the arch. Blocked it out completely. Well, that makes for a very dark photograph when you don't have any light. So what I did, because I wanted that starburst, I had the camera cranked down to f/16, I think it was, in terms of aperture, in order to get the sunburst with the light rays bursting from the center of the sun. And then all I had to do was stand in such a way that I moved slightly to the right until the sun peeked out from behind the arch and boom, exploded and created that starburst for me. And then just clicked. So there's a use of natural light where I was actually using the arch as a silhouette or as a shade to block the sun until I got it exactly where I wanted and then click. This is an image from Mallows Bay, which is in Charles County, Maryland, about 30 miles south of Washington, D.C. This one I call In the Ghost Fleet. This was a period of time for about 3 years. I was involved with a nonprofit exploring the shipwrecks and the what is now National Marine Sanctuary there. And while I was out on the water, in this particular case, I got out of my kayak and got onto a little spit of land and saw my buddy Stan kayaking across, literally in between wrecks. You can see all the wreckage sticking out of the water. This to me smacked of silhouette. It was mid to late morning, harsh sunlight, and for me this was a silhouette, shot a silhouette, exposed for the water, so it wasn't too bright, knowing that he would become basically a black silhouette. But that's what I wanted. I wanted him as a silhouette against that water and the little pieces of wreckage sticking out. So another natural light in harsh, direct sunlight. This one is another favorite. Well, I guess they're all favorites of mine. I love these things. This image was shot in Jordan Lake in North Carolina. And this one I really like. It's very interesting. It's composite. So it's two images, one layer laid over the other. One shot was a long exposure image, which gave me, if you look down at the foreground and the midground, that smooth look on the water. But I also got light because long exposures mean your aperture your aperture is open for a longer period of time. Your shutter speed is open. Your shutter's open for longer. Sorry, and you get more light on the sensor, which gave me that really nice glow on the surface of the water. It also gave me both images. One was taken with obviously a quicker shutter speed. One was taken with a longer one. Gave me the nice lighting on the trees. And the reason that was possible, as you see down below, there's a little bit less lighting on the trees. Well, that's because I took that image really early in the morning. That was probably 6:45, 7 o'clock in the morning, after slogging through a lot of woods, and waiting and waiting and waiting, and a lot of bugs too, and getting right down at the water level. I was essentially standing in really soft mud to set my tripod up to do this. But I got the image, and the direct lighting was literally from that low angle of light coming from very early in the morning right onto those trees, especially the tops of those trees, as that light was just starting to peek over the horizon, or actually more like the hills and the forests that were behind to my left and shining in at those trees. So natural light, I took advantage of that to to capture those trees lit that way. I have a project, an ongoing project of mine that's all about photographing ghost trees and dead forests like this in various places, because it has to do with showing off that this is what's happening to our trees when we're talking about rising sea levels and rising water levels all around the world. And so I try to capture these trees that are no longer viable. In any event, a little bit of research was done with this too. I had basically spent 3 or 4 other trips to North Carolina taking photographs of trees in and around Jordan Lake. And this was one where I had specifically decided I needed to get in early. I needed to hump through the woods with my gear and get set up really low at the water level to try to get this kind of a shot. So planning went into it, direct light, knowing that the sun was going to be direct and harsh even early in the morning was part of that. Okay, this was another similar one. This was down in Florida, and I think I have entitled this one a highlighted tree. This is a tree in the slough or little creek at Peacock Springs State Park in Lauraville, Florida. That's another early morning shot where the light peeks through the forest, and in this particular case, shined right across the creek, right at that tree. Now this is a little bit enhanced in terms of contrast and highlighting because of the black and white and the way I edited it, but essentially that's the image that you saw in color right there, and it was dramatic. But that's what direct sunlight can do for you. Okay. This one's another one, and this one is down in or up in Antietam, Maryland, at the Antietam National Battlefield. This is the Dunker Church, and direct light. You can see the lights coming from the left of the image by the shadows cast by the shutters on the window. But I like this one because it is minimalist. It is a landscape and architecture photo, but a minimalist one. And this church is very simple in design, very simple in the way the windows and the doors are laid out, and the colors in black and white for me are the difference in the light and the dark is very dramatic. Had to take this image. This was literally another one where I'm standing right in front of that church. The light is shining. I've got perfect sunlight, and I know it's that because I've researched it. I think this is the second time that I'd gone back to photograph this church. The first time I got a really good shot of it, really good angle, really good light, but I did it with my iPhone and the quality wasn't great because it was a long time ago. And so I had to go back. So this is the image I got, but I knew that the light was going to be like that as long as I researched the weather and sunrise times. And I think this is the last one I'm talking about before we get into techniques. I call this smokestacks in a black sky. Another example of very direct, very harsh sunlight. This was shot, I believe, somewhere around 1 o'clock in the afternoon in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. This is right beside a quarry that I dive in with buddies. And literally where I'm standing with that camera is essentially where we get out of the water and put our gear when we take it off. I did bring cameras with me to shoot on the surface on that particular day, and this image just stood out like a sore thumb, and had to shoot it. But again, it was a simple shot in terms of composing the image. I saw the image, got what I wanted from a compositional standpoint. Didn't have to worry about the light for any at all, because the bottom line is it was bright and sunny, direct, minimalist shot. With nice contrast, just a hint of shadows because of the curve and the stacks. Got exactly what I wanted. So another one of those lucky shots. Yeah, you make your luck, but lucky anyway. Okay, let's talk about techniques for direct light photography. I've got this I'm going to talk about very quickly in terms of gear, and then I'll talk about techniques. And gear, lens hoods are critical. Lens hoods, and I'll show you a picture of one of those in a minute, help you reduce or eliminate or minimize flares that come up from the sun. Neutral density and circular polarizing filters are also nice pieces of gear to have. I'll talk about those in a second when we get to the images, and then also any kind of reflectors or diffusers that you may have to moderate the sun, to redirect the sun, if you will, can also be had there too. There are a couple pictures of, I think that's my 24-105 lens, and in front of it on the left side there is a lens hood. That's the lens hood for that lens. On the right, you can see it actually applied to the lens. That is really the device that you use to avoid getting those spots of light from the sun on your image when you're aiming a little bit too directly at the sun. The risk here, and I apologize, I don't have an image to show you, but the risk when you get your lens and you're aiming it closer and closer, more directly, more straight at the sun is going to flare on you, and you're going to get these circles of light. In some cases, you'll get beams of light that come in and basically mar your image or obscure your subject. So it's tough to shoot with them. And there are a lot of ways to deal with it. The first way to deal with it really is to get yourself a lens hood. And what you do with the lens hood is you have it on your lens. Here's your lens. Here's the opening of the lens. The lens hood extends out beyond your lens. And then all you got to do is change your angle slightly, just slightly. And then all of a sudden, the sun is shaded by that lens to a degree and eliminates the lens flares. There are other things that you can do to eliminate lens flares as well, in combination with or separate from lens hoods. And one of them is literally just to hold your hand up. And I'll tell you what, I've got a lens here that I'll hold up. I'm getting ready for an underwater photo shoot tomorrow. So there's the lens I'm bringing with me. So anyway, that lens, you have that lens on your camera, you're shooting your subject, but you got sun coming in here and it's giving you these lens flares on your image. Well, guess what? Just hold your hand like this. Hold your hand in front of the lens, but in a way that you don't see it on your screen in terms of your composition. And you can literally block out the lens flares by moving your hand up above, moving to the side. So a technique for, I guess you call it ad hoc lens hood technique. But that's very useful in terms of getting rid of those lens flares. Other images we got here, if you look in the middle, is middle, top, and then the lower right are both neutral density filters. The one on the top is a 10-stop filter, which stops light. The one at the bottom is a 15-stop filter, which stops a lot of light. The bottom line on those is they're described, I guess, in layman's terms as sunglasses for your lens. If you really want to create a long exposure where you're drawing out the clouds, drawing out and smoothing out the water, or creating a sense of blur and motion with your image, these are the kinds of filters that you use. The idea is your shutter is open for a lot longer period of time, and to avoid just destroying the image by completely overexposing it with too much light, is you use these filters to stop out the light. And the 10-stop filter will do things like if you're shooting at 8 o'clock in the morning and you want to smooth out the water, you put the 10-stop filter on, and you can maybe get yourself that smooth water with an image that was shot for 7 or 8 or 10 or 30 seconds. 15-stop filter. I use those for two different things. One, I use them for most of my long exposures to really do ultra long exposures and really smooth out everything. And I'm going to show you one of those images a little later tonight. But that I can get, I've done, I think the longest I've done is an 18-minute exposure to shoot an image with that 15-stop filter. But that basically shuts out that image, shuts out so much light that you can keep the aperture open and play with how much light actually plays onto your image. Helps you work with contrast and brightness as well, because you can allow more light in. You can shoot longer than you would without it. Upper left corner is a reflector. That's a small one, but that's literally something that will bounce light. So if you've got sun coming in from one direction, you want to light up a shadow a little bit that's a little too dark, there's a little too much shadow, a little bit too much contrast, you can take that and literally keep it off camera, but aim that in such a way that it reflects sunlight back onto the dark side of your subject or of your portrait subject or your building, whatever you're shooting. And then lower left corner, the Lee Filters picture there, gives you a sense for the left side of that image, you're looking through a circular polarizer, the right side you're not. The circular polarizer will darken the image slightly. It's also going to crisp it up in terms of contrast. This is one where if you want to take a really good picture of clouds in the sky and really get a defined image of those clouds, using a circular polarizer will help you get that, because it'll basically accentuate the difference between the bright clouds and the blue sky. So circular polarizers can help you play with, again, that contrast. Okay, more techniques, and this is literally more techniques instead of gear. Put the sun behind you, put the sun to the side of the camera. That helps you avoid the lens flares, but also allows you to play with creating the shadows or capturing the shadows that are already there based on the sun. If you are in a place where you've got harsh sunlight and you want to take a picture of something, you can play with your shot as a silhouette, just like I did with the Gateway Arch. I'm going to show you a couple examples of these things in a couple of seconds. And then you can create or shoot from the shade to avoid lens flares, to avoid overexposures, and still get shots of the bright part of the image. So a couple of quick images. This is an image I shot of the observatory at Mount Wilson, California, outside of Los Angeles. I think it's in the Angeles National Forest. Excuse me. And this is one that was shot towards the end of the day with the sun shining on that observatory. But I really liked the shadows on the right side of the observatory, the darkness there. I wanted to accentuate the difference between light and dark there. So I positioned myself in such a way that that light was shining from the left onto the observatory, knowing that I get mostly black or dark, shadowy spaces on the right side. So that's where you're positioning yourself, so the light is really to your side, behind you. Behind you is really great because it illuminates everything in front of you. But that can be a little bit boring because everything is lit, nicely. Kind of like my image right here is kind of boring because the light's all straight at me. Okay, this is a silhouette shot where a friend of mine was diving above me in caves in Florida. And I looked up and saw him and wanted to get a silhouette shot of him. But I'll be honest with you, the reason I wanted to get a silhouette shot of him is not because he's so good looking in his dive gear, but because the water was just an incredible color of blue. So what you do there is shoot from below. The sun is shining through the water. He's basically blocking to some degree the sunlight as well. And I exposed for the water and not for him. So in other words, all of the shadows darken up, become a silhouette. And you don't know who that diver is. You can't see any of the detail in him. But you know he's a diver because you can see the outline. But what's really dramatic is the color of the water around him. So that's shooting for the silhouette, where the light source is really behind the diver or above him. This was one where I say shooting from the shade. This is one where on a hike somewhere, Great Falls National Park, I think it is, I captured this image of this shell sitting on the forest floor, and just happened to see it. Why? Because, well, trees were shading everything except for that one little spot, and boom, there it was. This shell, I took the shot. There was no overexposure here because a lot of that light was being filtered through the trees to a great degree, but just enough of it went right through to that shell that it lit it up and set it off in greater light than its surroundings. And so that's the shot I got, through the shade then. There's another shade shot. I call this Gothic Passage. This is in the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., up in one of the towers. And this was an afternoon shot where the light was coming, literally directly in from the side. And I was basically that entire corridor up until where the light begins in that long corridor. That corridor, the beginning of that corridor, basically was an ad hoc lens hood, if you will, which darkened everything up, allowed me to focus on the light right through there. So another natural light shot. This is called Downhill Light, another one where I was in a parking garage and the only light that came in was literally through that side and lit the garage like that. And that's natural light. Didn't do anything to alter that. Okay, next we're going to go into indirect light. And I guess I need to be moving here, but we're doing pretty well time-wise. Indirect light is all about natural light, sunlight. Apologize, I don't have any moon pictures here. I thought I had one to show, but I'm not sure if I do. But indirect light is essentially the same thing as direct light, but not direct. In other words, you've got sunlight, moonlight, ambient light from the environment that lights a subject, but is not very harsh, not very bright, but still lights things. And we'll talk about how that happens, why that happens. This image is called this American sycamore in white. If you've ever seen any of the American sycamore trees along the Potomac River up along the West Virginia border, you know that they kind of shed their bark in the wintertime and they become this white color. Everything else is dark and gray and brown, and they stand out really dramatically. So I took this shot. Natural light. It was a cloudy day. The sunlight was diffused to a great degree, but managed to light this tree up without really sort of overemphasizing anything around it. So I got this nice minimalist shot. Again, indirect light. Indirect light, the light does not directly shine on your subject. Again, light may be diffused by clouds. That's a dramatic use of the light, way to take advantage of it and use it for various purposes. And then we're going to talk about the light may also be available as indirect light at blue hour and golden hour. And we're going to talk about those in a few seconds. This was an example of diffused light that I shot up in Ontario, Lake Ontario. In, I believe that was, I have the date here somewhere. Where did I put it? February of 2019. A friend of mine that lives up in Kingston, Ontario, gave me a call with basically a day's notice. Said, "Oh my God, Frank, you got to get up here. The lake is freezing." And I don't know if anybody of you are familiar with Lake Ontario and the weather up in Canada, but what I learned was that approximately every 10 years or so, the weather gets cold enough, fast enough, that the ice really starts forming quickly on the surface of Lake Ontario, especially up on the northern shores in Canada. And what happens is if there's that combined with a little bit of wind blowing that wind towards the shore, that ice starts accumulating on the shore. It starts buckling up and forming these dunes or mountains of ice. They're very dangerous to walk on, and you don't walk on them, but they're pretty dramatic to shoot. And so I drove up with a day's notice, got up there and shot some images. This is one that I like in particular. I call it Ice Flows, which essentially shows you really the concept here is the diffusion of light. And this is because it was a very dark day in terms of cloud cover, a little bit of a bluish gray, which I've accentuated a little bit in post, just to set off the sky and the water from the ice. But the bottom line is there's not an awful lot of harsh light and a lot of harsh shadows here, and that's because it's all diffused by the clouds in the sky. So using the clouds as diffusion to spread that light and soften that light. This is one of the Peace Bell at San Pedro, California, the Korean Peace Bell. And this is the eve of the monument. This is a good example of the diffusion of light. This is a place where if you go on a sunny day, you've got absolutely brilliant blue sky behind you. I ended up there on a cloudy day, and as you can see from the image, the clouds essentially formed this completely white background because of the way the light was diffused throughout the sky. But what it allowed me to do was to shoot the eve of the monument and get incredible detail and color from up close. And I really enjoyed shooting this, and I really like this photo. In fact, I like it so much, I like it better in black and white. And just to show you there, what happens here with the diffusion is I was also able to get a really nice detail on this image. So that's what happens when you get diffused light. It's not harsh, doesn't create harsh shadows, allows you to see an awful lot of the detail of this image because the shadows aren't really darkened too much. This is another one called Ascending from the Bedfordshire. This is HMT Bedfordshire, which was an anti-submarine ship that the British government loaned to the United States in World War II. It was one of quite a few hundred ships that were sunk during the war in North Carolina waters by German U-boats. So it was a war grave. But after visiting that war grave down about 100 feet down, we rose up. And while I was rising up the line to get to the boat, I managed to see this image of two divers waiting on the line to take their turn to head up to the boat, and shot this image. This is all natural light. There are two things at play here. One is if you look at the bow of the boat, it is almost completely obscuring the sun, so it's creating a little bit of a shadow, not completely a shadow, but a little bit of a shadow, so it's not really darkening everything too much, just reducing down the harsh light from the sun. The water also was a little, not quite the clearest I'd ever seen in North Carolina. And as a result, that diffused the light to a great extent. There was a little bit of cloudiness up above too. And that created a nice soft blue color to the water. Gave me the shot to get this silhouette of the divers. So diffused light. Okay, let's talk about blue hour. Blue hour is the twilight in the morning or evening. It can happen before the sun rises or after the sun sets. Generally speaking, the sun is between 4 degrees and 8 degrees below the horizon. It is when it gets down that low, the indirect light that is lighting the sky has a much bluer hue to it, and that's why they call it the blue hour. Essentially, all you got to do to find out when the blue hour is find out when your sunrise and sunset times are. If it's a sunrise time, get there about an hour before sunrise and wait till it turns blue and everything starts lighting up. If it's sunset, wait till the sun sets and wait till 30 minutes to an hour afterwards when you get that bluish color when all of the orange goes out of the sky. So I'm going to show you a few of those images right now. This is called Florida Skyline. This is actually more of a golden hour because the sun's not quite down yet, but you get a sense for the difference in color when the sun is really low down, about to drop below the sky. It's still got that orangey yellow, that golden glow to it, but above it becomes very blue. Once that sun drops down, it gets even more dramatically blue, and that's the blue hour. This is one in sunrise that I shot about 2 months ago in Louisville, Kentucky. This is the Louisville Water Tower Park, which is a water facility and a historic facility on the Ohio River in Louisville, Kentucky. I qualify this as blue hour as a photograph. You can see most of the sky is blue. The lights are still on. It's still considered pre-dawn. This was shot at about, say 5:50, 5:55 in the morning. The sun was still not up above the horizon on the right side of the image, but there's a little bit of that orange glow starting. So that to me, that's a blue hour shot if there ever was one. There's my black and white version, because any of you who've seen my shows stuff before know that I like black and white, so have to do black and whites. So that's what blue hour kind of looks like, black and white. This is a blue hour shot at the end of an afternoon at Mount Storm, West Virginia. There's a power plant that supplies about 25% of the power for the Washington, D.C. area. This was a long exposure at blue hour. You can tell the long exposure because of the smooth water. You can tell from the effluent coming out of these smokestacks that it's being softened up. There was actually almost no wind whatsoever, so it was very little movement of that smoke. That was a 15-minute exposure, so it was a long exposure shot with that 15 stop filter on it. But you can see the blue area. You can see how everything gets really blue. It's natural light. For me, I wasn't as concerned with the power plant itself. I wanted you to get a sense for the power plant by seeing the smokestacks and the smoke coming out of it, and then the blue sky. So it's more about that, just the impression of a power plant. And I think the long exposure helped do that. But that was done at blue hour. There it is, even more dramatic as a silhouette, almost, if you will, at blue hour in black and white. Okay, golden hour. Let's talk about that as I'm getting close to the end of my time here. These are the times just before sunrise or sunset and just after sunrise, when the sun is just about to peak over the horizon. You could even say even after it comes up over the horizon. Everything in terms of light becomes really golden. It's nice and it has a softer feel to it, but you still get really defined shadows. It's really a magical time to shoot photos. The daylight is redder or more golden in hue and really is nice. Creates great black and whites. It's softer, much softer than the harsh midday sun that you get sort of noon, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. This offers more contrast, and this is all because of the low angle of the sun. The sun is shining in at low angles and creates much more shadow, gives you a lot of play on contrast. So a couple images to show you here. This is entitled Striated Sky. This is a beach in Oregon that I shot in 2016. This is indirect in a couple of ways in terms of techniques, because in one case you've got the sun obscured by that striated cloud across it, which diffuses it to an extent. And then you've also got it low in the sky, so it's creating a low angle of light, which in this particular case is really lighting the detail in the waves that are lapping up on the shore. So that's a good example of a golden hour shot in my parlance. This is another one. I call this Goose Creek Morning. This was shot looking out onto Goose Creek in Loudoun County, Virginia. And this is one a little later than well, I guess towards the end of golden hour. And this is literally the color that came out of the camera to give you a sense for golden hour. There was not much in the way of planning here. I was shooting a couple of other things. Lorraine had me placing some photos that morning in one of the libraries in the county, and I went out before sunrise just in case I might find something I'd want to shoot. And I found this image, Goose Creek in the morning. So I got the light rays piercing through the sun, through the clouds, or the mist that is rising up off the creek between those layers of trees. And then you get sort of that golden hue from the hour of the day. I do have a black and white version of that as well, which I don't, I'm a black and white guy, but I don't like that one as much as the first one. But golden hour, Goose Creek morning. This is a shot I took in February of 2020 in a little town called Mayo, Florida. This was end of the day, golden hour, even though this is a black and white. The sun is very low in the sky, and boom, lights up the side of that building and really, really shines off of the bricks. I had to take that shot. My friends were yelling at me because we had finished a day of diving, and that sun was shining, and I had to take that shot. And the only place to take it and get all of that light in just the right angle was right in the middle of the street. And so they were screaming at me not to get run over. But nice photo. I like that one. But that's golden hour. That's what it can do for you in terms of contrast in black and white. This is another one from the beaches of Oregon, just like the previous one, Striated Sky. A little bit more diffusion on the light. The light, I think, at that point in the day was even a little bit lower. There was a little bit more mist that was rising up off the water, and so you've got this diffusion, this softening of the background, with the silhouette of the couple walking along the beach. This one is also another. This is a golden hour shot of Manhattan. Took this in December of 2018. Gives you a sense for well, there's a good story here. It gives you a sense for what can happen when the sun comes up. I got to this place about an hour and a half before sunrise in Liberty State Park in New Jersey, and it was raining. It was not a whole lot of fun being there. It was cold. It was December. And I thought, the weather report, obviously they got it wrong. Uh, it's a miserable day. And I started shooting right from the get-go. But I waited and waited and waited and waited and kept shooting. And then eventually it got to the point where the light was really at that very low angle. Still, the weather kind of cleared out. The sun popped up just above the horizon, and boom, golden hour lit up the buildings of Manhattan just right. Won a couple of awards for this one, but really enjoyed the process of doing it more than anything else. This is also a panorama that was originally 11 images stitched together digitally to form the entirety of Lower Manhattan. In any event, that's called Gotham in the Morning. Techniques, getting close to the end here, so I'll have to go quickly. Again, just like direct light, neutral density filters are used. Tripods, don't think I had a tripod in the previous one, but tripods are used for light too, especially when you're talking about trying to use long exposures. You need tripods. When the light is low in the sky, when it's indirect, when it's diffused, you may need to get more light onto your sensor. So increasing your ISO or increasing your aperture to open up the lens or open the sensor up to greater light may be techniques that you have to apply. You can use reflectors and diffusers, just like I talked about before as well, to redirect light onto a particular part of a subject. But from a compositional point of view, I'd say the key here is getting out at the right times of day and then looking for the contrast. You may have to go out multiple days and look and scout around and do a lot of scouting to find where there's that definition, and then go out with your cameras and start taking pictures. I don't know, I've said this before, but I do a lot of scouting where all I do is go out with my phone and just start clicking images that I think look great at a particular point in the day, with a mental note to go back tomorrow or the day after or a week later or a year later in some cases. I would say also, when you're talking about indirect light, consider black and white. As you saw that black and white image at golden hour of Mayo, Florida, that image really doesn't do it in color. There's just too much distraction with all the color. That particular one works in black and white, in my opinion. So think about that as well. And then always shoot in RAW format. RAW format or DNG format, if you know that format, the .dng file format. If you're shooting Canon, I know it's CR2, CR3 are their basically their RAW formats. Those are formats that allow you to capture as much data as possible, store it, and then work it more dramatically, more effectively in post-processing. Okay, so a couple images here. The real image to focus on is the one in the middle, which is really all about clouds and recognizing that clouds diffuse light and create a softening effect on light. This is particularly true when you're getting, overcast skies, etc. This one wasn't overcast; it was taken from a plane, but you get the idea. The filters as well apply in very much the same way with indirect light as direct light. And then also, I said also, look at your ISO and your shutter speeds. As you can see, there are varieties here. The ISO speed on the right, 12,800. My God, that's, dramatically, more open than or more sensitive than most people shoot. Sometimes you need that to get the light you want when there's all that darkness too, and you want to get a little bit of detail in the shadows. Okay, so let's keep moving. I think I have just a few more images here to go through, and then we'll open up questions. These are just, a couple of images I show you that I've shot all natural light. This one very quickly was taken inside an old farm building with the light shining through the lights. It was very simple to focus down on the light coming in through the windows, shut down the aperture, and get this dark, basically this dark background with the light shining through. Natural light photography. This is another image of Manhattan skyline, very similar to the previous image I showed you, but this is one where I went back about 10 months later and said, I'm going to do something completely different. And I went back early in the morning again. The idea here was not to shoot anything with light with the sunrise, but to try to shoot a silhouette of Manhattan. And this is what I got. Got some of the night lighting from the lights inside the buildings, which I think worked nice in this photo, and a little bit of building sunlight reflection on some of the facades of the building, but very little because the sun was still very low in the sky. So this is probably more of a blue hour photo than a golden hour photo. This is one where I guess you could say I was using the terrain to create shade for me to block out the sun. I had an image like this with a diver going the other way in more or less this exact spot in Florida. And this was one where I went back and was able to shoot this image the way I wanted. I was shooting from a place where there was a rock wall alongside me here. The diver was swimming through the sunlight, and I was because of that shade, getting the light rays coming down. So that was basically a manipulation of the direct light to be able to get those rays and the diver in the right place. He basically swam around in circles to come back as he kept swimming towards me multiple times for me to get just the right amount of exposure on him. I didn't want too much detail on him because all I really wanted was the impression of the diver, but I didn't want just a big black spot like a silhouette. So it took a few shots to get what I wanted. But he was basically in the sunlight and pointed a little bit away from it directionally and looking straight at me. So I call that cave diver in sunlight. This is my son jumping up in the Wilkes Tunnel in Alexandria. Classic example of a silhouette with indirect lighting, obviously, or diffused lighting because of the clouds you can see. What was neat here was this is sort of a natural reflector, if you will, that I used. To get this picture lit the way I did, I took advantage of the fact that that diffused light was actually coming in from all angles, and it was hitting those two walls and bouncing off of those walls, and essentially entering into the tunnel just enough to light the lane marker, if you will, down below in the foreground, but not enough to light my son too much, so I got the silhouette that I wanted. So that was a nice little experiment there. Anyway, that is my presentation on natural light photography. This is my contact info, frank@fssphotography.com, if you want to communicate with me. My website address, fssphotography.com, if you want to look at more photos. And at this point, I'll leave it open to Lorraine to direct questions my way.
Okay, thank you for that amazing presentation, Frank, and some just really fascinating, beautiful, beautiful pictures. I do have two questions, and if anybody else has a question, please feel free to type them in the chat box and I can relay them to Frank. First question, do you have to take many shots to find the right exposure for a long exposure?
Yes and no. Everybody tells you, oh, you should learn your photography well enough that you don't have to do that. I've been shooting photographs for what now, 34 years. The bottom line is I still experiment. I will go out and I'll shoot photos and I'll say, darn, that's underexposed, or boy, I didn't really do that very well. And I'll adjust settings. And sometimes you just have to be ready to experiment with that. I think the answer really is the more you do it, the closer you get and have less experimentation to do when you're on site. But that doesn't mean you're not doing it. I mean, I bet you there aren't very many photographers who just show up on a scene and say, oh, F16, ISO 100. It really is. I think that's what I want to start with and see what happens, and you make adjustments. So, yeah. And yeah. I mean, to be honest, no, nobody's perfect. Nobody can do that. Well, maybe somebody, but not me.
Do you shoot color and convert to black and white in processing?
Yes. And the reason I do that is because if you shoot in raw format, I think for the most part shoots color, and you get all of the data that the camera takes in when you take an image, which allows you to do more in post-processing. I think you can stop down your camera to shoot only in black and white if you've got a DSLR. Most of them do that these days. And you know what? You still get a good amount of data, and there are arguments to be made for that too. I like to shoot in color and then see. I see things in black and white for the most part, but sometimes you see something that just that one I can't shoot in black and white. It won't be as dramatic, and so I shoot in color with the idea that I'm looking at something for black and white. But if color really turns out to be the image, then I have it. That way, I've got all the data. Lorraine, I think you went on to mute there.
You're right, I did. While we're waiting to see if there's any more questions, I just want to let you know about some upcoming photography programs. On August 5th, we're going to have a landscape photography program. You'll take a tour of the Shenandoah National Park, spectacular hikes, waterfalls, and overlooks with photographer Vladimir Glabev. Grablov. And he's going to show you his mythology, creativity, and techniques for creating the landscape photography, because it's difficult to capture those kind of landscapes and scenery in photography. So he'll lead you the way. And Frank, do you want to talk a little bit about your Tulsa photography program coming up?
Sure. I'll just give one more plug for Vladimir. He's a friend of
Yeah.
mine, and he shoots not almost, I think exclusively in film format, medium format cameras. So and literally, if you can imagine, Ansel Adams out there with the tarp over his head while he's looking into his camera to compose. That's what Vladimir does, and he's really good at it. And I love having conversations with him. So
his
check
photos
him
are
out.
beautiful. Thank you.
Tulsa, I think, do we say 28 August, is it? Or 28 August. I was fortunate enough to be asked to go to Tulsa, Oklahoma for the 100th anniversary events of the Tulsa race riot from 1921. So the idea was I was engaged with a group and still am active with them to hunt for mass graves that are allegedly out there. So we've got a group of people, forensic anthropologists, experts in international law and mass atrocity law, and a lot of people who are just plain old good researchers. And they asked me to come along because I'm a photographer and they like my work. And I was out there photographing the events, so doing what you'd think of street photography, but also getting in up to my eyeballs in history of Tulsa. We literally explored potential mass grave sites for later exploration. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the events. We're going to talk about 1921 and the history, and basically where things stand now. And then I'll be with a team, one of the team leader for the group, Matt Beggart, and we'll talk about all of that and plans for the future, because Matt and I are going out again in October to do even more detailed exploration of mass grave sites before we bring in the experts with the technologies. So going to be kind of fun, I think, and sobering as well, because of the history.
Sobering, yeah. That's going to be on August 25th.
25th.
So, yeah. Okay. So if there's no more questions, thank you all so much for attending. We hope to see you in the next couple of photography programs. And Frank, do you want to put up that slide one more time with your contact information in case people have follow-up questions?
Oops, I think I closed it out. Give me a second.
I can just type it in the chat. So it's FSS Photography, right? At
Frank at fssphotography.com. Oh, there we go. Oh, hang on.
Yep.
You get all the way to the bottom. There it is. Oh, now I got to share it. Can I still share? What's going on?
You should be able to, yeah.
Oh, there it is. Okay. Boom. There it goes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, everybody, thank you very much for attending. If you have any more questions, you can obviously email me. I'd be happy to answer them. And please attend Vladimir's presentation. He's fantastic. and hope you'll attend ours on Tulsa as well.
One more question just came in, Frank. Do you
Oh,
usually
sure.
add vignettes to your photos?
I'm sorry, do I add what to my photos?
Do you usually add vignettes to your photos?
It depends on the photo. Sometimes if there's sort of not a whole lot in the way of leading lines, I will add a vignette to sort of narrow down your eye a little bit. And sometimes I won't. I mean, I've done photos without it where it's pretty obvious what I want you to look at, and not hard to do. Yeah, it just depends on the photograph. So yeah, I will. I think most photographers will tell you to be really, really subtle with it. Uh, Although, a lot of landscape photographers will say, don't do too much because, oh my gosh, it'll look like a vignette. Well, you know what? Sometimes people put vignettes in there because they want them to look like vignettes. So the answer really is whatever you like and whatever you think will draw the viewer's eye to the subject uh, can be effective. So yes, I do use them, but not every time.
Okay. Well, thank you
All
all
right.
again for attending, and thank you, Frank, for that awesome
Thank,
presentation.